What if the Jesus most people were taught to worship is only half the story? What if the version repeated for centuries is the safer version, not the deeper one? What if the real scandal is not that the Gnostics were wrong, but that they saw something most people were never meant to look at too closely? What if Jesus did not come first to settle sin, but to shatter illusion? What if he came not mainly to manage guilt, but to wake human beings out of a spiritual coma? And this is where the familiar story starts to crack, because the Gnostic reading does not begin with sin at all. It begins with sleep. It does not begin with moral failure. It begins with a species that does not know it is asleep. Subscribe now if you like the kind of ideas that do not leave the old story untouched, because this one keeps getting sharper as it goes. In mainstream Christianity, Jesus is usually understood as the Savior who dies for the sins of humanity. That is the center. That is the frame. But in the Gnostic reading, the frame shifts hard. Jesus is still holy, still sent from above, still carrying a mission no ordinary teacher could carry. But he is not only the redeemer of sin, he is the revealer of truth. He does not just pay a debt. He names the prison. He does not just forgive in this reading, he exposes. He does not just save the soul, he tells it why it was trapped. And that difference changes everything. The Gnostics said the real disaster was not that people broke rules, it was that they forgot what they are. Not first sin, first amnesia, not first guilt, first blindness. Their claim was far more dangerous than be better. It was this: you are living inside a false story and calling it reality. The word Gnostic comes from Gnosis, but this is not information, it is recognition, not facts, not doctrine, not borrowed belief, recognition, the kind that makes the whole structure of your life suddenly look staged, the kind that hits you so deep you cannot go back to being the version of yourself that fit comfortably inside the old script. That is why, for the Gnostics, inner knowledge mattered more than ritual, performance, or religious machinery, because a person can do all the right things and still be asleep. A person can look faithful, sound faithful, even be admired for being faithful, and still have no real contact with the deepest thing inside them. The Gnostics looked at that and said, the problem is deeper than behavior. The problem is consciousness. In plain English, here is the shock. They believed the material world is a trap, not just flawed. A trap. That does not mean every physical thing is automatically evil. It means the visible world has a way of training the eye outward until the soul forgets itself. A prison does not need bars if distraction does the job. The trap works best when people call it normal life, work, image, appetite, status, fear, achievement, comparison, survival. The endless pressure to build a self the world will reward, while the deepest self quietly starves. In Gnostic thought, there is something inside the human being that does not belong to the machinery of this world. They called it the divine spark. You could call it the most alive part of you, the part that still feels true when everything else feels fake. The part that knows, even in silence, that you are more than your body, more than your role, more than your panic, more than the version of you other people consume. And according to Gnostic cosmology, that spark is trapped inside a world built by a lesser being called the demiurge. The word sounds heavy. The idea is brutal and simple. The demiurge is not the highest god. He is the builder of the visible order and the prisoner of his own arrogance. powerful enough to build a world, blind enough to mistake it for the whole. In Gnostic thought, the ruler of the system is not the highest light. That is the scandal. The demiurge creates a world of matter, control, limitation, and spiritual forgetfulness. So the human problem is not only that life is painful, it is that the system itself keeps mistaking the surface for reality. It keeps teaching people to worship what decays: more money, more applause, more control, more proof that you matter. Meanwhile, the part of you that actually matters gets buried under the noise. And this is where Jesus enters the story, in a way that can feel almost explosive. In the Gnostic view, Jesus is not here mainly to patch up the system. He is here to reveal that the system is not ultimate. He is not here simply to fix the world. He is here to wake people up to the fact that this world, as it presents itself, is not home. In texts like the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus sounds less like a manager of religious guilt and more like a revealer of buried identity. He keeps pushing inward. He keeps pointing beneath appearances. He teaches as if the kingdom is not somewhere far away behind the clouds, but hidden within, waiting under layers of fear, habit, and spiritual sleep. Salvation is not only something done for you, it is something awakened in you. Not only pardon, awakening. Not only rescue from penalty, rescue from illusion. And that is what makes this reading so sharp. It shifts the center of gravity from external transaction to internal rupture. Jesus does not just tell people they are forgiven, he tells them they are asleep. He does not just announce mercy, he unveils reality. Then the miracles begin to look different too, and this is where the old story starts taking on hidden text. The blind are not only healed, they are awakened. Blindness becomes spiritual blindness. Sight becomes recognition. Water is not only crossed, matter is mastered. Chaos is stepped on. Fear is outrun. Miracle becomes sign. Sign becomes code. The miracle is not the point, the decoding is. If you only see the event, you miss the revelation. In the Gnostic reading, healing the blind is not only about damaged eyes starting to work again. It is about a person waking up to a reality they could not see before. Walking on water is not just a supernatural flex. It is a statement. Spirit is not finally ruled by matter. The visible is not the highest authority. The miracle matters because it tells you the world you can touch is not the whole map. Some people hear freedom in that. Others hear heresy. That alone tells you how deep this cut goes. But the story gets stranger in Gethsemane. Jesus is sweating blood. He falls into that raw, human prayer. Let this cup pass from me. Most readings stay on the surface of pain. The Gnostic reading goes after the structure beneath it. This is not just agony, it is disclosure. The cup is not only suffering, it is embodiment. The cup is the trap. The cup is what it costs to enter the system and expose it from within. And when Jesus says, "Not my will but yours be done," this is not surrender to the ruler of the system. It is alignment with the true God beyond it. It is Jesus accepting his role as the revealer, the one who enters fully into the human condition without being reduced to it, the one who drinks the cost of disclosure all the way down. And then comes one of the most revealing details in the entire scene. The disciples fall asleep, again and again. Jesus is standing in the most charged moment of the story, and the people closest to him cannot stay awake for even 1 hour. In the Gnostic reading, that is not a side detail, it is the diagnosis. Revelation was happening, and they slept through it. The disciples did not just fall asleep once. Humanity keeps repeating that scene. The scandal is not that they slept once. It is that human beings keep doing it while truth is standing inches away. The disciples sleeping in the garden is not ancient history. It is Monday morning. It is people living on autopilot. It is whole lives spent scrolling, chasing, performing, consuming, and never really asking who is doing the living underneath it all. Eyes open, soul sedated. And then the story reaches the part most people are not prepared to hear. Judas. This is the point where the safe version of the story starts collapsing. In the Gospel of Judas, the villain is the only disciple who sees the script. The hated man becomes the only one who understands what Jesus is actually doing. The betrayal story cracks open here because Judas is not just the traitor, he is the one who can bear the truth. In that text, Jesus tells Judas that he will sacrifice the man that clothes me. That line turns the whole story inside out. The body becomes clothing, the outer story becomes cover. Judas helps bring about the separation of Jesus from the body that hides him. In that reading, Judas does the act history condemns because he sees the purpose history missed. He becomes the man cursed by the outer story and necessary to the hidden one. He does the unforgivable thing because the hidden version of the story demands it. And yes, this is exactly the kind of reading people try to shut down fast. Of course, it sounds dangerous. It threatens the moral architecture people are used to. It destabilizes the entire emotional logic of the story. But that is also why it has such force, because it forces a brutal question. What if the outer story and the hidden story are not the same story at all? What if the man history cursed is, in one forbidden reading, the only one willing to do what revelation required? Whether you accept that or reject it, you cannot call it weak. It is dynamite. Then comes the Last Supper, and the meaning shifts again. In Orthodox Christianity, the bread and wine stand at the center of Eucharist, sacrifice, remembrance, and atonement. In the Gnostic reading, the meal stops being only remembrance. It becomes transmission. Bread and wine stop being only symbols of death. They become coded signs of awakening. This is not only ritual, it is initiation. To eat here is to receive more than bread. It is to take revelation inside. To drink here is not only to remember a death, it is to absorb a hidden teaching. The point is not ritual performance, the point is interior ignition. The table is not just an altar of future suffering, it is a school of awakening, a place where Jesus gives more than body and blood in the ordinary sense. He gives a way of seeing. He gives spiritual nourishment. He feeds the part of the person the world keeps starving. In this reading, the Last Supper is not only about what will happen to Jesus physically, it is about what must happen inside the disciple spiritually. The meal becomes the moment where hidden truth is not just spoken but ingested, not admired from a distance, taken in, lived, turned into consciousness, and then the cross. This is where the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Traditional Christianity sees the crucifixion as the central act of salvation, the moment Jesus dies for the sins of humanity. The Gnostic reading goes somewhere harder. The cross is not only suffering, it is exposure. The crucifixion is not just where salvation is purchased, it is where the limits of the system are exposed. In some Gnostic texts, the deepest reality of Jesus remains untouched by what happens to the body. Matter can wound the surface, it cannot extinguish the source. Wood, nails, empire, shame, spectacle, none of them can reach what is deepest. That is the point. The empire can break the body, it cannot touch the hidden life. The world can humiliate the visible form, it cannot destroy the divine spark. So the crucifixion becomes not just tragedy, but revelation. Not just pain, but proof. Proof that spirit and matter are not equal powers. Proof that the visible system can do its worst and still fail to conquer what is most real. The cross stops being only payment. It becomes exposure. It shows exactly how violent the world of appearances can be, and exactly how limited it is in the face of what does not belong to it. And from there, the resurrection changes too. If resurrection is only future, the Gnostics would say you missed it. The scandalous claim is this: resurrection is not first a future event, it is a present awakening. It is not only about a body coming back after death, it is about awakening now, right now, while you are still alive. The body is not the only thing that can rise from a tomb. Consciousness can too. The resurrection is the moment your inner being rises out of illusion, the moment the old story stops owning you, the moment you stop confusing the costume for the self, the moment you stop calling survival the same thing as life. That is why some Gnostic texts speak so bluntly: if you do not receive resurrection while living, then death will not magically hand it to you later. In other words, awakening delayed is awakening refused. This is not about waiting around for a miracle after the grave. It is about the radical possibility that spiritual rebirth must begin inside history, inside consciousness, inside the person who is still breathing. And this is where the whole thing stops being a strange old theology lesson and starts sounding personal. Because a lot of people today know exactly what this feels like, even if they never use the word Gnostic. They know what it is like to move through life and feel split from themselves, to do everything right and still feel wrong in some deep, hard-to-name way, to chase success, love, recognition, order, productivity, and still end up staring at the ceiling at night with the sense that something essential has gone missing. The ancient trap did not disappear. It upgraded. Same sleep, better technology, same captivity, new wallpaper. We are surrounded by tools that promise connection and leave people more fragmented. We are trained to build identities that can survive online, sell well socially, and perform well publicly, while the hidden self gets thinner and harder to hear. A prison does not need bars if distraction does the job, and the trap works best when people call it ambition, adulthood, responsibility, relevance, or just the way things are. That is why this old Gnostic reading still lands with such strange force. It says, maybe your emptiness is not failure. Maybe it is evidence. Maybe the quiet ache is not weakness. Maybe it is the divine spark refusing to be fully anesthetized. Maybe the moments when you feel most out of step with the world are not always signs that something is wrong with you. Maybe they are signs that something is wrong with the script. And if that is true, then Jesus as revealer matters in a very immediate way. He becomes the one who walks into a person's managed life and says, "This is not all you are. You are not just your job, your shame, your appetites, your trauma. your status, your body, your image, your panic, your usefulness, your brand. There is something in you the world did not create and cannot finally own. That is not vague spirituality. That is a different map of the human being, and it changes things. It changes how you suffer. It changes how you lose. It changes what you stop worshipping. It changes how easily the world can manipulate you, because once a person begins to wake up, the old bait loses some of its power. The performance starts looking like performance. The noise starts sounding like noise. The world that once looked solid starts showing its seams. That does not make life easy, but it can make life real. It can make a person harder to seduce with shallow things and harder to terrify with temporary ones. Maybe that is the deepest sting in the whole Gnostic reading. Resurrection is not just a promise for later. It is a demand now. Wake up before your life is over. Wake up before the script finishes writing you. Wake up while there is still time to become fully alive inside your own existence. And this is where people split. For some, this reading feels profound. For others, it feels dangerous. For others, it feels uncomfortably familiar. Maybe the real question is not whether it shocks you. Maybe it is why. So who is Jesus? Is he the Redeemer of sin, as Orthodox Christianity insists? Is he the revealer of truth, as the Gnostics claimed? Or is the deeper possibility that the story is bigger, stranger, and more layered than either side is comfortable admitting? Have you ever had a moment when the old story stopped working and you knew you could not go back? Put that in the comments. I want to hear not just what you think, but what you felt while listening. And subscribe for more conversations like this, because the safe version of a story is usually the version that survives, not always the version that reveals the most.